Welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where the number needed to listen is 1. It's been quite a morning. We've had some technological disruption. I'm not pointing fingers, but if you could see me, I'm looking at Lava and Frank. But it's a midday recording. Normally we are sedate. Well, maybe it doesn't come across as sedate, but it's usually late in the evening.
Sedated, yes.
Yeah. Now we're punchy and feisty and fully caffeinated. Linda, how are you?
I am just fine, raring to go. Thank you, John.
Lava, how are you? I've seen you in the interruptions, feed your dog, do your tech, and now you're texting. What's up with you?
I'm not texting. I took a picture of my dog. It's great to be here. I love this little beast. She's like the best thing that's happened to me in a long time.
What breed is she?
She's a sheepadoodle. She's an Old English sheepdog and poodle.
Oh, wow.
And she's a great big fluff ball. She takes over everything. It's great.
This is a very cute picture. We should change our podcast into a podcast. And Jason, it's that favorite time of year for me. I'm not sure how you're feeling it, but the NBA finals are playing. The NHL playoffs are ongoing. Your team is out. Major League Baseball has started. I heard that you've taken up, lawn darts and bowling. How are you feeling?
Listen, I'm doing well in pickleball now. I love this sports time of year, and I just want to announce everybody a really important sports announcement, which is I got to see John Sherbino play hockey. He came to my city 2 weeks ago, and for the Docs on Ice charity tournament. John has taken off his training skates. He's actually able to skate with a stick now. I enjoyed watching the game. I heckled a lot. That time where you whiffed on the puck, John, that whistle was me. Just saying, from the stands. And how did you do in your division? Because I just want to mention that our team, with Vern Nake and Jim Watterson and other educators, we won our division. We went 4-0. How did you do?
Well, first off, I managed to tie my own skates this year, so that was a win.
Excellent.
Second, we won 3 and then lost our final game with 3 seconds on the clock, so it felt like we had championship ripped from our hands. But last part of Jason, I think you were in the lowest division possible in that tournament, which has 20 plus divisions.
Wow.
I'm not sure if I would be doing victory laps through the streets of Ottawa based on your performance.
Yeah. Now, the top division is made of ex-pros, but from then on down, there really isn't much difference between, B division and Z division that I was in. So, I think it was fine. Anyway, this episode is actually not about hockey. This is actually about big data, which is a really exciting topic for medical education and health professionals education. So I want to bring you guys there with an open question here. This big little society question. Come and focus there, Lava. Lava's like Googling Wikipedia right as we speak. So she has an evidence-based answer. I'm wondering if you can give me an example of where big data has made society better.
My traffic app.
Which traffic app?
I didn't want you to steal it. I use Waze, and Waze, no, but it's perfect. It's a perfect example of when to use big data, because what I care about is where the cars are. I want all kinds of data from each car about where it physically is located right now, objectively in reality. Boom. I don't know why there's traffic there. I don't know why things are happening, but I know where the cars are, and that's what I want my big data to do. Boom.
All right. Linda, do you want to jump in on some sort of app answer? And then John.
It's not an app answer, but I keep thinking about global warming and how much more we know about global warming because of big data. What we, unfortunately, I think you sort of said where big data made a positive difference. So I think even though we know all of this, I'm not sure it's made much of a difference.
Okay, so big data for problem identification, like Lara's driving. Okay, go. John?
The obvious big data one I can think for the health sciences would be sequencing the human genome and then starting to map different genes that associations or maybe even causative relationships to disease. But if I think about med ed, I think we use big data in the sense of we have a national scope, but it's never really big data. So the big data in Canada involves 18 universities showing successful residency applications and placements for residency training. But when you only have 18 universities, you're not really talking about big, you're talking about whimpering very small pieces of data. And sometimes we use the term big data in a colloquial sense and misrepresent what we're actually talking about. We're not talking about hundreds of millions of data points, we're talking about hundreds.
All right. So why are we talking about big data? It's because I found this cool paper in academic medicine. I'm going to pitch to you that this is a really important paper that we'll all go back and reference as the universe unfolds. So This is the pitch from these authors is that our field of health professions education is growing exponentially with scholarly output, journals. We have way more institutions every year. We have more researchers. We have more innovators. We have more ideas. But at the same time, critics have argued that we suffer from endless local innovations without advancing an evidence base. So this is like a generalizability problem. Are we really advancing our field? The harshest critics would say that HPE is, quote, not scientific. I'm sure you've all heard that somebody said, education, it's like it's a soft field, something like that. Something really, really irritating to hear. Counter critics would say to even demand, quote, evidence smacks of like just absolute positivism. So, maybe education is ultimately always local. It just has to be embedded in context. So you can't even have a right answer to have good practices in HPE. So that's what's underneath this paper. I was going to pause there because I was having trouble getting connected to the internet again. I don't know why. Okay. In the larger view of education globally, these debates continue to rage. I think you can see that in several publications. Probably the current consensus is that there are good practices out there and that they're always, of course, implemented locally and adapted to local context. My question for you before I tell you what the paper is, do you believe that there are good practices that need to be implemented everywhere? Lava, Linda, John.
Do I believe there are good practices that should be implemented everywhere? For some things, sure. For some things.
Like?
I think there are absolutely some. Okay, so for instance, we can get big data to show us where different residents from different schools are matching to different institutions. Great. It can tell me which schools are having a higher percentage of medical students who are not matching to residency. Fine. It tells me nothing about why. And I also want to highlight that one of the things we have to be a little bit careful of is what we are attributing to the data. Like what kinds of inferences can we make? Because it really depends. Small side note, my husband, for when he was early in his career, he often had to teach introduction statistics on campus. And he loved the first day of class because he would show the students the same data set, one data set, one question, 3 different techniques, 3 different answers. And the whole point of that exercise was to say that a lot of this really depends. And it depends on the quality of the data, the kinds of inferences you want to make, and the kind of analysis you carry out. So yeah, it can tell us some things. Sure, for some things, yes, there's a right answer.
Linda?
I got that as a definite maybe, Lava.
So did I.
Yeah. So, yes, there's best practices, but it's all contextual. What's good or best in internal medicine may not work in psychiatry and surgery. What's good in undergrad may not work in postgrad or CPD. What's good in the East might not work in the West. Big school, small school, you name the context. So I think it's all contextual. And I guess the second thing is what you count as data or evidence differs. And as I said on, I think, the first iteration of this multiply tried podcast, it's data and evidence is in the eye of the beholder. What John thinks is good data and good practice probably has a number of zeros at it. Lava wants to have some really good qualitative answer that's got a how or a why in it. And Jason, being somewhat simplistic, wants to have an N of 1.
Fair enough. John, is there evidence to guide health professions education? What I hear from Lava and Linda is they don't know. So what do you think?
I didn't hear that. I agree with everything they said. And I probably can't say it any more eloquently than what's been done, except to have this punchline.
Now you're brown nosing.
Well, no, it's a true statement. There is no one size fits all. And context really is important. I'm going to do a shout out to Rachel Ellaway, who's the lead author on a paper that I'm involved with. We rarely cite our own papers, so I'm cautiously recommending it, but I think it's really good, mostly because the other co-authors, not including myself, added something thoughtful here. It's published ahead of print in academic medicine and looks at the issues of what counts as evidence. So what's included in is your data, your so-called big data, and how is that evidence compiled? And what is the context in which it's interpreted? And what are the implications for how it takes place? And so the paper, I think, will, for an interested reader, help to deconstruct all of the assumptions that situate around your question, Jason, is there evidence that we can use to tell us how to be better educators? It's a very loaded question with so many assumptions behind it. We have to unpack in multiple different ways what's meant by evidence and what's meant by our context and what's meant by what kind of outcome we're looking for.
Awesome. So thank you all for that setup. I love it. So I've entitled this episode, Does Big Data Mean Big Evidence? This is a paper by Thelen et al. I hope I'm pronouncing Dr. Thelen's name correctly. I have not met them before. It's in Academic Medicine in February 2024. And it starts with this premise that, HPE is criticized for not improving. So what would it take to advance HPE in a systematic, thoughtful, systemic kind of way so that's focused on learners, patients, and context? And maybe the answer is big data. So let me tell you a little bit about this paper. The purpose was to describe the product of meetings sponsored by the United States National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, known as NASM, the Board on Healthcare Services, that looked at prospects for using large national data sets to improve health professions education. More specifically, the authors said they wanted to examine the potential for national GME, so this is the residency education, PGME, infrastructure to improve, review the output of these 2 workshops on the topic, and propose a path forward. What they did was produce this narrative consensus report that resulted from these 2 workshops held by NASM in 2017 and 2019. They had input from 15 national organizations involved in U.S. Postgraduate medical education. Attendees achieved consensus on a desired future using big data to improve HPE. Participants also included leaders from oversight organizations, leaders from teaching institutions, and an expert in HPE and big data. Examples of existing data collaborations were highlighted and explored, and they didn't tell us a lot more in the methods about how consensus was achieved. I'm just going to pause there. I'd really like to hear your input on either the lack of methods reported or just the premise of a consensus report telling us how to make a better future. So, John, Linda, Lara, do you have any comments on the premise of this paper?
If you're going to stamp on your title that we have consensus, then I want to know who's in the tent and who's outside, and how are decisions made about that. Because it will determine the orientation and the prioritization of where you go. Are you representing a cohort that seems appropriate or makes sense to me? And already, this is really an American-focused consensus statement. So I think if you are an American educator, this might be much more relevant. If you were international in scope, there might be some translations. Second, the process of consensus, I think there's a number of ways to get to that. They don't describe a consensus process, but presumably everybody, or at least the organizations there, sign on. And I'm not sure if they're representing the organization or are they representing themselves personally, or is it some kind of hybrid where they are representative of an organization, but they are representing their personal opinions. So I got to say, in the absence of all of that, I don't know. Is it any better than the consensus of me and some of my buddies got together and we came up with our own consensus statement? There's not a rigor underneath that, or at least a transparency to make me understand who's there and who's not.
Okay, I hear you, John. There is a giant table that says, here's all the organizations that were here. I don't know if that helps you at all. I don't think there are any trainees. Linda, what do you think?
But just to come back to that, Jason, I didn't see anything that said this was endorsed and was the organizations were signatory to the consensus, which usually is a much more stronger wording. And my guess is actually the opposite. We had representation from them, but the individuals may not have been speaking on behalf of the organization.
Gotcha.
Me being a McMaster University professor having an opinion is not the same as McMaster University saying we endorse this or we stand behind these recommendations.
All right, Linda, we got John standing behind. What do you think?
So I agree, John. You're using words like consensus, though. This is not a consensus paper. And in fact, the label up at the top says scholarly perspective. So it's kind of an opinion piece, and maybe an opinion piece with a bunch of organizations behind it. But again, not endorsed. And it sounds like they got together a couple of times, had a couple of chats, probably had some breakout groups, and came up with some good ideas. That's as far as I can go with the methods section.
I'm going to predict there was cheese and crackers. Lava, what do you think?
So it does say I hear what you're saying, Linda, because it is a perspectives paper in my opinion as well. They do say several times in the paper, for instance, on page 141, participants reach strong consensus that the goals of GME are to train physicians who ... And that's fine. I have no problem with people getting together to write perspectives papers. I think it's great. I have real problem when we try to create consensus moments at conferences, because conferences are getting harder and harder for a lot of people to get to in terms of finances, supporting, those people who have care responsibilities at home. So for me, making consensus statements or trying to do that at a conference is, I'm uncomfortable with it, because I think it restricts the representation of diversity.
Okay, these two were invitational. So this is like a U.S. government organization inviting experts and they talk about their definition of the experts, and then they gave them a task type thing. So that's kind of the context for this paper. Let me tell you. Sorry, Lava, do you want to jump back in?
I think it's okay to invite people to participate in a session. Absolutely. I wonder if it was a closed session, first of all, and then the other thing is that if you're inviting people, that means you're not inviting others.
Yep.
And so again, and I understand that all things need to involve selection, and I get that. But when the barrier becomes you have to be here in person, it just creates a whole bunch of structures around who can and who cannot be there.
Okay, fair. All right. So now that I've set up this paper a little bit, the real reason why I picked it was these findings. And so I'm going to outline these big headers of findings. And then I'd really like to hear from everybody whether you think that this is actually really important going forward. So first of all, one key finding was really defining the problem. And they sort of said something like an ROI kind of case that they make for the problem. The U.S. invests $18 billion a year in residency education alone. And then there's this whole continuum of all the health professions. There's evidence, however, that medical graduates continue to have gaps in competence. They experience suboptimal training processes. They don't reflect the population served and exit with habits that can cause harm. There's a bunch of papers like that. While GME does continue to improve and innovate, they tend to involve innovations with small innovations, local innovations with poor evidence of generalizability. So one of the quotes was, "Lack of access to large-scale data is a key barrier to generating empiric evidence to improve." Again, this emphasis in this paper on positivism. So that's the problem. The second bucket is how large data sets can help.
I want to interrupt for a sec. I would be okay with that statement if you took out the words large scale. Lack of access to data is a barrier to generating evidence, but why does it have to be large scale?
Okay, that's fair. That was the focus of this group, right? They were thinking big. So number two is how large data sets can help. The statement is large national data could guide innovation in HPE inputs. So like training characteristics and prerequisites, interventions like curricular designs, and outcomes like shared metrics of outputs of HPE. The third bucket is what's the current state? So what did they find? There's currently a lack of comprehensive, aggregated, high-quality, longitudinal HPE data. Each institution in the system collects its own data, and even within institutions, there may be silos between programs and phases of careers of various health professions education. Lots and lots of obstacles to linking these data sets, and you can all think of some of them. You're probably living some of them if you've tried. Policies, regulations, privacy concerns, database structures, definitions, programming platforms, and just identifying individuals. And then, so the last two major findings were a proposed model going forward. The authors propose a new HPE ecosystem in which national data is collected on those involved in HPE from pre-health professions education all the way up to the end of practice. Such a data system would need to have a common data dictionary, standards, longitudinal links, and identifiers. Analysis by individuals, programs, institutions, and regions, and even nationally would enable new evidence base for improvement. Ultimately, enhanced HPE outcomes would lead to better patient care, is the premise. And they said finally the next steps that were found at this conference series was to produce an inventory of currently available data, begin data sharing pilots, and begin the work on a new kind of governance infrastructure, both both regulatory and technical, to enable sharing across organizations. The authors conclude that a national infrastructure effort to link large aggregate HPE datasets will ultimately benefit society. So there you go, folks. I want to know, what do you think? Is this important or is this meh? I really want to know. So Lava's rolling her eyes. I really want to hear about why. John, Linda, Lara.
I roll my eyes. I've shrugged my shoulders. I was surprised this got into the literature. The topic's important,
Harsh,
but it's nothing new here. In the way it's being tackled, it seems kind of Pollyannish or superficial. Now, it's none of their fault, but there is an Ottawa consensus statement, which again, Lara is at risk for some of the challenges you talk about who can fly all the way to. Was Ottawa in, I'm trying to figure out which year it was, but this might have been when it was in Australia, just published in the same month. And the lead author is Kula Sargam, and the senior author is Claire Touchy, both friends of the show. They did something I think is the next level of this argument, which is, sure, we need to share data. And in Canada, we have something called the Canadian Institute for Health Informatics. It's funded by government, and there's millions and millions of dollars put into this infrastructure to capture clinical data. And as we started to think about, can we do something likewise for health professions education data? The challenges are, one, funding, which is always the obvious thing. But what this Ottawa consensus statement, and it was published in Medical Teacher in 24, looks at is, what are the issues of privacy and who governs the data? And the reasons are really important. As soon as you lump a whole bunch of data together, there is an issue of who has access to what, how are they following and knowing me, and is the data at any point being misinterpreted? And that's a real issue with large data sets. And so governance is the preeminent question to be asking about these large shared data sets, particularly when we're trying to share data across organizations and somehow vesting control to another organization outside of that. What does that mean? What is the unintended consequence? And so the paper that you're presenting, Jason, gets us to hey, we should share information. We should share data. I think that call has been there for a long time. And it doesn't ask the next questions beyond the who's going to pay for it, but what does it look like? And what are some of the risks that balance out some of the rewards of doing these large shared data sets?
Linda, what do you think? He sounds smart. I'm not sure you can skate backwards. What do you think?
I can't skate backwards. But I can swim backwards. Okay. John, I agree with you. In terms of who's going to...
Don't be so perplexed.
In terms of who's going to pay for it, if this is 1.8 or however many billion dollars it was, 188 billion, if you take 1/1000th of that or 1/10,000th of that, that's still a fair bit of money to actually put into seeing if it works. And so I would say that of that billions of dollars, just take a tiny percentage and use it for paying for it. The other thing is, we already have a system, at least in Canada, where we as healthcare professionals or medical practitioners anyway, have an identifying number that follows us, like MINC or something like that, from the time we start med school till the time we finish practice. So that exists. And in terms of privacy, if you use an identifier as opposed to a name, I suppose it would help. But that hasn't been that difficult to implement.
Okay. Lava?
So my big thing is about the quality of the data and what you're going to do with the data. So when it comes to the quality of the data, what I really care about is that as we know, so for instance, let's say that these data are going to be collecting in part for perhaps some of the assessments of residents. We know that there is extremely high variability behind the quality of those assessments. Some observations are, I saw you for 15 minutes and you did a thing, so I'm going to give you 3 across the board. Or I can give you nuanced feedback and all sorts of different things. Or some people are like, forget all the quant, just look at the qual notes because that's where I'm going to tell you what's actually happening, right? So already the data, the quality of the data going in has me nervous because it's highly variable. And then we're going to aggregate a whole bunch of it. And then we're going to say, because there's so much of it, it's good data. So one of the things I really think is important that we wrestle with in a real and difficult kind of way is that all data is not created equal and that we have to worry about that. That has to be in our minds when we think about the second piece that I have concerns about, which is what you're going to use this data for. We know from other big data sets that exist that all kinds of scholars will come to these data sets with all kinds of different questions. And are these data appropriate for all of those sorts of things? There needs to be somebody who's, I don't want to say gatekeeping, but who can explain the kind of data that's here and what this data could answer, so that if somebody says, I want to understand the mating dance of the tsetse fly, they can't come to this data set and expect to find an answer.
Awesome. Okay. That's the paper by Thelen et al. And we've got a variety of opinions. This is an important topic. I think is consensus forming. And then lots of hesitations about whether or not this has gone deep enough. I also want to add my concern that there really wasn't a lot of learner voice here talking about how they felt about having large data sets that includes some very important metrics on their careers.
But, you said there's not a learner voice, but one of the points they make is that this should be across the continuum. So it's not only learner voice, it's practitioner voice.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So we're going to do methods and we're going to do impact. So methods.
You can't do methods. There are no methods.
No, we can do methods.
It's a perspectives paper.
Yes.
John, what's your argument about methods for a perspectives paper?
They actually have a diversity of perspectives for their perspective paper. They don't describe how that diversity got put together, but this is more than three of my friends sat down and wrote a commentary. So I think they get props. They met a couple times and they had some process by which they assured themselves that the voices in the room, and we're not sure how they got in the room, were well represented and on board with the outcomes. I give this a 3.
Okay, so we're voting. Linda?
I'll give it a 2. I'm not so impressed. and I sort of agree with Lara. You really have to dig to get some kind of methods here. I think that's why I gave it a 2. But maybe I should just be saying, nah, I'm not giving it anything. If I look at Lara's face, that's what I would do.
We can't have big data if we're from 4 down to 3, and Varpio won't vote with a standardized score. So we're going to have a messy database who just supports her argument that we can't trust big data.
And I have Varpio for the win. I'm going to give it a sheepadoodle because my dog's sleeping.
So I translate Lara. So
no, you don't get to translate me. It's a sheepadoodle. That's what I'm going to give the methods.
Sheepadoodle is 2 on the Papers podcast scale. So 2 2s. John's giving it a 3. I'm going to give it a 2 as well, because I didn't think they did methods. They had methods. They just didn't describe them. Does this paper have impact for you? Is this a paper you would pull out to facilitate some other conversation, or would you cite? So, John, Linda, Lara.
I think the question they ask is an important one. I don't think they frame it in a way that is contemporary with where the thinking is right now. So I'm going to give it a 1.
Spicy.
It's not talking about governance, and it's not talking about misrepresentation of data and misrepresentation of the database by researchers. And that's the big issue with big data.
All right, Linda.
It makes you think. And so I suppose that's good. But despite the fact that they say they've got some direction in it, I think there's got a lot of non-feasible directions. I agree with John on the governance and what they're going to do with the data issue. Maybe I'm just feeling generous. I'll give it a 2.
Wow. Okay. For all the authors who are out there weeping, and there's a lot of friends of the podcast who are on the authors list. Remember that we had many technical difficulties today. John's really tired from wiping out on gravel after biking yesterday. I have 3 sore joints. Maybe that's skewing our scores today. Lava?
Wow. Just a little pressure, eh? Just a little.
Yeah, if you could be nice, that'd be great.
I'm going to give it
bias.
I'm going to give it a 2.357892.
Okay, I can translate that. That's a 2. I'm also going to give this a 2 for all the reasons that's stated. This is a really important topic. I picked it because I thought, this is what's going to take us in the 21st century. But instead, I felt like it was a rehash. So maybe others will build on this and make it even better.
JF, you picked a paper that you gave a methods to and a impact to. We're going to give you a little tutorial on how to pick papers.
I don't just pick the best papers of the year. That's one thing I do. But the other thing I do is also pick important topics so we can debate about and inform others who are listening. So there you go. That's the purpose of the podcast.
Guess what? John and I did it again. We took over the studio. And that's because we have more mail in the mailbag. A colleague of ours at Lund University in Sweden. Now, Alexander is his first name and his last name is spelled Tejera. Now, in Swedish, the J is a Y. So I'm going to say Tejera. Tejera? Yes, that's how I'm going to say it, Alex. I'm so sorry already for just massacring your last name, but thank you so much for writing. So, John, Alex is writing us with a question about one of the episodes where we were talking about degree creep and thinking about the kinds of certificates and acknowledgements and training that medical educators need. So let me read you a couple lines from his letter. First, he is so kind. He starts with this. Thank you for the great podcast. I've been listening to it for some months now and have found that your discussions widen my knowledge of HPE and surface as critical reflections of my own research in the field. Thank you, Alex, for that. Okay, to continue. He writes, just recently had the chance to catch up on some episodes, and he wants to ask about one of the things we've discussed. And he says the topic he wants to talk about is how institutions value teaching competence and experience in relation to research when considering, for example, recruitment and promotions. So he writes, many argue that teaching is not valued as highly as research experience, and that it's not recent, and it's only recently that some career paths have opened for people interested in teaching rather than research and medicine, although not as many and not as prestigious. In the podcast, you mentioned that the emergence of HPE master's programs might give this career path some credibility or some legitimacy, which is supposed to be the finding that a master's in HPE is now considered mandatory to become program director at some institutions. He writes a little further, my personal experience is that even though courses or certificates have become a criterion for certain positions, this does not increase the value of teaching experience. It is instead sometimes considered a nuisance to have to go through all these courses to be considered for a promotion or for a certain position. What are your thoughts? Do the masters in HPE programs have the potential to increase the value of teaching experience in academia of health sciences? So, John, big question. I'm pitching it to you. What do you think?
Well, I know you're going to say yes or no. You're going to take this as a binary because that's your want to look at the world in black and white. I'm teasing.
Okay, good.
So I do think that there is knowledge and there are skills that are unique to a teacher that can be acquired. And the process of how you acquire them are varied. And I'm not going to say there's only one way to learn anything. I do think that there is a value in academic programs, whether they are fellowships or graduate degrees, in the scope and the time and the value they bring to you probably reflect who you are, your past experience, and the type of course and the specific course that you're applying to. So there's not one size fits all. And that's going to be an easy answer, I think, for most of us to understand. I think anytime that we say thou shalt have or you must, I get really concerned about that because what it's doing is it's starting the gatekeeping function.
Yeah.
And we're moving into a little bit of a checkbox or a degree type of acquisition where we get all the titles and all the letters and not necessarily a guarantee that you have the letters and you can actually apply. But the balance of it is that simply because you've been a trainee forever does not immediately translate into the most evidence-informed or best and most efficient teaching practices. And so I think if teaching is your passion, then I think you can certainly learn and acquire and become increasingly expert and innovative in your teaching practice by going to resources, formalized and others that will bring value to your practice. But whether you have to tick that box, I'm against box ticking most of the time.
Yeah, me too. And I actually, one of the other parts of this is that I think one of the challenges that is underpinning Alex's question is about the fact that getting these kinds of certificates is becoming required for positions. And the thing is, these certificates, these degrees, they're not all the same. They're incredibly highly variable, in fact, in terms of what's required and what's optional, or if it's research focused or only class-based or those sorts of things, like course-based. So suddenly asking for this to be a prerequisite for a position is like, well, which kind of these degrees, which kinds of these certificates, what's the focus? Now, of course, that's not something we can answer today. But I do think, Alex, your question's really a good one. And it's one that our field is going to have to wrestle with as we increasingly expect these kinds of certificates or degrees to be part of the expectations on a job posting for different things or for promotion. So with that then, Alex, thank you so much for writing. We really appreciate it. And please, dear listeners, if you have a question or a comment, we're going to invite you to write to us. You can reach us at thepaperspodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on the internet. Just look up Papers Podcast. You'll find us there. And so next time, John, thank you for chatting with me in the mail room here on the paper plane.
Hey, thank you all for listening. We hope to see you all live when we're with the Association for the Studies of Medical Education in the UK. We're going to be in Warwick, and we're looking forward to seeing you. And please come up to us if you have issues with the podcast, or you want to talk about why John was so off, why Lara uses big words unnecessarily. Like, you can let us know. I'm happy to take those, write them down, bring them forward to a production meeting. We'd love to see you there in July.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Take care.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.
Honestly, Linda, I wish I could bring my dog with me everywhere. She's like the best. I love her so much.